Hello and welcome to the CAPE training program. My name is John Leatherman. CAPE is short for Community Assessment and Education to Promote Behavioral Health Planning and Evaluation. This training and related activities was sponsored by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the USDA Network of Regional Rural Development Centers. The objectives of the program are to enhance behavioral health literacy by offering the Mental Health First Aid workshop with an emphasis on substance abuse. Our second objective is to motivate the creation of community coalitions to address behavioral health needs, such as those related to the opioid epidemic. Finally, we are encouraging the notion of formal action planning to create a community roadmap for improving the local situation. In this video, I'll continue discussing community needs assessment by talking about conducting primary research using community surveys. Government data is limited. Sometimes we have to ask our own questions to figure out what is happening in the community. One of the resources we've prepared in this CAPE project is this primer on community-level behavioral health surveys. You'll find this at the CAPE website at healthbench.info. A survey can generate a lot of useful information, but it's difficult to do well. Among the benefits of surveys are that they generate information specific to the community, they have the potential to generate a lot of information quickly, we can gain insights into such things as community awareness of a problem, perceptions about an issue, and get a better understanding of people's behavior. Alternatively, surveys can be costly. It can be difficult to construct valid survey instruments, analyze their results, and interpret them accurately. Oftentimes, poorly constructed and executed surveys can create more confusion than clarity. We might think about a community survey if we are interested in understanding the representative views about something by members of the community. Alternately, we might want to understand something about some subset of the community population. Surveys can help us to gain better understanding of new and emerging problems in the community. They can be good if we're seeking to understand something occurring in specific areas or neighborhoods within the community. And finally, they can help us understand the effectiveness of some sort of policy or intervention introduced within the community. All survey approaches have drawbacks and limitations. Mail surveys can be costly, labor-intensive, and are subject to self-selection bias. That is, some people will choose to respond and some won't. We may not know who didn't respond or why. Telephone surveys are both labor-intensive and can be very costly. Wireless communication technology makes getting a decent sampling of phone numbers very difficult for a small geographic area like a community. Web-based surveys are much faster and easier to conduct, but we still face the challenge of obtaining email addresses. Even with the internet, changing telecommunication technologies create additional challenges. Many younger persons don't even use email any longer. Again, we face the problem of self-selection bias. Face-to-face interviews may be the best, but they can also be the most costly and time-consuming approach. This might be best for initial research preceding use of one of the other methods for broader dissemination. We frequently need to use a sampling method. Conducting a full census of the population is best, but generally not feasible. If we sample, ideally it will be random sampling, where every member of a population has an equal chance of being asked. But achieving a random sample using things like mailing or phone lists all have limitations and are subject to self-selection bias. We might use something called cluster sampling, which is an oversample of a given subset of the population to try to ensure we're doing a good job capturing information about a population group or geographic area. All surveys are subject to non-response bias. Given the extent we are exposed to bogus surveys that are mainly solicitations, we have been conditioned to be distrustful of many surveys. Likewise, with the frequency of robocalling, many people won't answer numbers they don't recognize. We need to say a few things about the ethics of surveys. Ethically, we need to be transparent about what we are doing and secure informed consent prior to administering any survey. We need to say what we are doing and why. We need to say that the respondent has the right to refuse or to withdraw from the survey. We need to identify any risks associated with participation, and we also need to assure the respondent's anonymity will be protected and that any information they give us will be protected. We also need to be very careful when we are dealing with vulnerable populations, such as those with mental or behavioral disabilities. Likewise with captive populations, such as those who are in jail or prison, and we need to be especially careful with children who may not understand what is happening or who may be intimidated. For those of us in a university, we have institutional review boards that want to know about all research we are conducting that involves human subjects. We need to be very careful and follow the institutional rules. An alternative to formal surveys is something called key informants. This involves some sort of sampling of key leaders or people who have access to specialized information. For example, caseworkers from various social service agencies may have better insight into particular populations or trends. This is generally less expensive and easier to get, but it's a non-random method, and the information we obtain isn't necessarily reliable. A few comments about survey design. In general, it's best to structure a question as a straightforward yes or no question. If there is some intensity of belief, such as strongly agree or strongly disagree, then offer a quantitative scale of choices that can be interpreted numerically. Avoid compound questions. If you use words like and or in a question, that's really two questions, and you won't know what people are responding to. Avoid questions that lead to something that could be perceived as a socially desirable or politically correct response. Avoid constructing any questions that frame things negatively or include negative words. When offering choices, include the full range of available choices. When asking for opinions, the choices should be nuanced, offering something like a 5 or 7 point scale in which to place views that are between either extreme. Finally, demographic information can be useful to help understand differences between population subgroups, but there needs to be some caution since too small a sample may not be representative of an age, gender, or racial category. A few other considerations. Keep it as short as possible. The longer it goes, the less likely a person is willing to devote time without strong incentive. If you can get the information you need some other way, it's probably best to do so. Figure out at the beginning of your planning exactly what you are going to do with the information collected. Finally, be sure the respondent will know the answer. It's always a good idea to pre-test. You don't want to have to throw away any information because you realize after the fact people interpreted the question differently than you intended. In the past, there was a certain wisdom about the best timing to conduct a survey or time to be avoided, but the internet may be changing that. You do want to follow up because some people need to be asked 2 or 3 times before they will answer. There is something of a formula to data analysis. Typically, it starts with counting basic frequencies of response choices. Then responses might be subdivided into categories of interest. The results might then be illustrated graphically because people are more inclined to take in a picture rather than stare at tables full of numbers. Finally, you tell the story of what the picture means. Move any excess or extraneous results to an appendix if it's not on point, but may be useful or of interest. Here are a few more things I have learned about doing surveys. First, I've had many requests for help to conduct a survey. When I ask why you need a survey, many times the answer is that we would like to know something. That usually means they have no idea how they might use the information and may not use it at all if it doesn't tell them what they want to hear. I usually reserve my time for those situations where it is clear there is a need to know and a plan to use the information. To reinforce the point, if people don't have a specific plan for how the information will be used, don't waste people's time by asking them needless questions. The shorter the better with a survey, and yes/no questions are the best. Ask questions where it is possible to quantify the answers into a meaningful numbering system. And we will frequently want to include open-ended questions, but it can be difficult to interpret the responses. If you ask 200 people an open-ended question, it's difficult to make sense of 200 different answers. Finally, give people the chance to explain themselves if they want, but don't try to force them to answer. In the interest of time, we'll conclude our discussion and pick it up in the next video. We'll conclude our discussion of local needs assessment by looking at some alternative ways of gathering local data. I'll also offer a few thoughts about building persuasive arguments based on the information you've gathered. From there, we'll go to a discussion of assessing community preparedness. Here's our contact information. Thank you for watching.